Good morning. Happy to see all of y'all. Hope your week has been good. Things to think about that are coming up for us. We are working on a psalm sing at the Bayou Teche Brewery, and it is likely going to be in October. We don't have a date picked yet, but we're trying to get all the campuses together. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get all the Christ churches together, both, and then anybody else who wants to come. And we'll go out there and sing psalms and hang out, and it'll be a nice thing. So that's coming up in October. So y'all get connected to that. Also, Tactics is back. We are officially starting to promote our Tactics conference again this year. I'm sending the email this week to sponsors, to people to get it sponsored, and like actually pay for it. And then tickets, I think most of you have probably already bought tickets. But if you haven't, we're still in like that early bird-ish kind of phase. So the pre-sale's over. $25 a seat is over. That doesn't exist anymore. But we have early bird prices, which I think is like $40 a seat or something like that. So anyway, if you have not bought tickets yet, now is the cheapest time. They just get progressively more expensive as the event gets closer. So we want you guys to come. We've got phenomenal group this year. So we've got Toby's coming back. Pastor Toby Sumter's coming back. George Grant from Tennessee is coming in, which if you've never got to hear anything by George Grant, you need to listen to him talk. He's a genius, very, very well-educated guy. He's been doing Christian education for the last, I don't know, ever, okay, basically. He's a very phenomenal, super intelligent dude. Pastor Yuri Brito is coming from Pensacola, Florida, coming to be a part of what we're doing, and we're also having a new guy, Jared Longshore. Do y'all know who Jared Longshore is? Some of y'all do. Jared Longshore, who was with, Founders. He was with Founders with the SBC, if you know what Founders is, and now he lives in Idaho, and he teaches at New St. Andrews and all that stuff, and they're coming. And our theme that we're going after this year is Christians and their brains. That's what we're talking about. The theme is Make Sharp Your Swords, which just basically means don't be an idiot. That could be the subtitle, like Make Sharp Your Swords, subtitle, don't be an idiot. That's what we're striving for here as Christians, not being idiots. So that's what the whole theme of the conference is going to be. And, I forgot to tell you this part. Okay, this is actually really cool. I have two guys coming in on the Friday. So the conference is Friday and Saturday. The Friday during the day, probably from around lunchtime on, I have two guys coming in, one from West Monroe, which is actually a buddy of mine that I went to college with, and another guy from Idaho. They're flying in, and they're teaching us how to make our households musical again, like how to make that like a tradition and a function in our families, and how to do that kind of a culture. And they're going to teach singing, and they're going to teach some like techniques and stuff, and they're going to teach songs and how to participate in them and well. So I would super encourage you to come to that. His name is Sean Bonet. Sean is one of the guys, remember when Gabe Wrench got arrested? Yeah, so Sean Bonet is the other guy who got arrested. He's the other guy, But anyway, Sean's super cool. He's also a very musical guy. And then Jared Ritchie is the name of the other guy, which I don't know if any of y'all know Jared, but he's an old friend of mine from school. So it'll be a lot of fun. So y'all are invited to come participate, and those will be good things. Tactics is January 24th and 25th. And if you know anybody who wants to sponsor, holler at me, and we'll get that stuff done. Okay, that's it, I think. Amen. Have you ever watched a coyote hunt before? Anybody ever seen coyotes hunt? Okay. What's different about how a coyote hunts than anything else? Well, they do kind of eat anything, but I'm talking more about hunting and their tactics specifically. How does a coyote hunt? Does it hunt by itself? It's typically a pack hunter, right? Okay, so this is what's fascinating here. Coyotes are not stupid. In fact, they have if the thing that they're dealing with is necessarily larger than them, they work as a group actually. So one of my neighbors had a big dog, and one coyote came out to tease the dog, right? To get the dog to chase it. And then as the dog started giving chase to the coyote, guess what happened? Out came coyote number 2 that the other dog couldn't see, right? So the dog gave chase to the first coyote, And then here comes number 2 to try and take it down. The dogs, coyotes, wolves, pack hunting animals, they hunt based on what? What's their tactic? What's their technique? It's not just pack hunting, but there's something that they're depending upon in that animal they're trying to take down. What is it? Vulnerability. Well, some of them are bigger than them, though. So not necessarily vulnerability, but there is one specific vulnerability, and not necessarily just weakness, but they're depending on maybe getting it alone. Instincts. But what instinct specifically, Mark? Fear! Who said it? Dana said it. Pack hunts typically depend upon the fear of the animal being chased in order to fire it one direction or the other. Now, fear can make you do one or two things. What can fear make you do? There's 2 options here. Which ones? People typically call this a fight or flight response. The fight response is, okay, you fight. Like the first dog comes out, the first coyote comes out, teases my neighbor's dog to chase him, and my neighbor's dog's like, I'm going to kill this thing, right? He's triggered the fight response, and then the pack kicks in to go and take down the dog in the first place. See how that works? Now, he came outside with his pistol and shot the coyotes, and they left. Well, the one that's still alive left. The other one is very dead. All right. Now, what does the flight response do? It runs away, right? Now, have you ever been with hunters before and participated in a drive when you hunt? Do y'all know what I'm talking about, a drive? So typically, y'all gonna have to forgive me, my throat is just full of junk today. Typically, whenever you're hunting and you participate in a drive, there's several hunters and they space out, 30 or 40 yards between them, and they do a push, they do a drive. In other words, they're walking through the woods together and they're making a bunch of noise to try and drive the animals out of hiding. Do y'all get what I'm saying here? And then there's another hunter on the other side that's waiting for those animals to show their heads. That's called a drive, okay? It's common in more old school hunting. Now we just put a pile of corn out and sit in a box and wait for something to happen. Like used to, you would drive animals and it was a thing. I used to participate with my dad in that as he would go to one end of the property and just spend the whole time walking towards me to see if we could spook anything into movement. But that was the whole point. The design of a drive hunt is the same thing as the coyotes and their pack hunting and the wolves and their pack hunting. It's intended to get the animal spooked, afraid, and respond. Does that make sense, you guys? Now, why is it important to trigger fear? What does fear override? Fear overrides your brain, right? Fear overrides you being in control of yourself. This is like every horror movie that ever has come out. No, don't go down that hallway. Not that door. Why are you going outside at night? It's like every horror movie that's ever come out is full of those moments because somebody's just completely panic-stricken and they're running and they're always the first one to die. Like that's just how that kind of stuff cuts out. But fear is this response that we are not necessarily in control of ourselves anymore whenever our fear trigger switches, okay? And we respond either with fight, okay? Or you respond with flight. Now here's my hypothesis. I think that this is how the enemy gets to us most. Okay? I think that the enemy gets to God's people. Now, when I say us, I mean God's people. I'm not talking about people who don't have Jesus in them. I'm not talking about that. But I'm talking about people who have Christ in them, Christians. I think that the weapon that the enemy wields against us most is fear. I think that's it. I think that he finds our buttons to press, and he presses them, and then we respond with our fight or flight. In other words, we respond in our emotions and no longer in our self-control. Do y'all get what I'm saying here? So this kind of, like, as I was going through some things this week, this kind of manifested itself like around a Monday or a Tuesday, and I was like, I think we got to talk about this in the whole church because this is a big deal. So here's my point. If the enemy is trying to control you, but you have Christ in you, the way that he gets to you is through your heart, through your feelings, through your emotions. In other words, through things that aren't necessarily real. This is how the enemy runs us, I believe. I believe that he controls us with fear. Now, let's ask this question. Why? Why would fear be, I would argue, the primary play that the enemy would make against us? Jesse? Because it overrides reason. It's an easy play. Because it overrides our ability to trust in the Lord. Yes? I'm sorry. Very deaf old man over here. Try again. Because he likes it. He likes the power. That's possibly. He's very prideful. He's very prideful. Let me get somebody else. But I appreciate you. What? Why do you think he would do that? Anybody else got ideas? Because it works. Do what works, do what works. Here's what I think is going on. I think it's all he's got. Now, this is a big deal. I think it's all he's got. Okay? Now, I'm gonna walk you through some Bible today to try and flesh this out really well. But if we can get this, we're going to be able to fight a lot better. Now, today we're talking about the helmet of salvation and all those things. But here's my point. I think that beyond fear, the enemy ain't got much to wield against you. In other words, if he can get you stirred up in your feelings, he can throw you around. But if you sit in your self-control, he can't throw you around. Do you get what I'm saying here? He can drive you down the hill. He can drive you into death, or he can trick you into some kind of fight response. But that's what he's got. That's the tools in his belt. Now, here's what I'm thinking. John chapter 1. Go to John chapter 1. Somebody open it. Very sorry. Keep coughing. John chapter 1, somebody read John chapter 1, verse 5. John 1:5. Read it nice and loud. Did not comprehend it. Somebody give me, what translation is that? Okay, somebody give me, who's got an English Standard? Okay, hit me, buddy. Very good. Does anybody have a King James? I mean, you all do because you all have phones, but that's okay. You don't have to pull it up right now. The two, never mind. Okay, so the idea here, okay, so who's the light? Who's the light that we're talking about in John 1? We're talking about who? We're talking about Jesus, right? But the Word made flesh, right? And come to dwell among us. That's it. And there was light. And the light is okay, so we're talking about Jesus. Jesus is the light. What's the darkness? Okay, obviously it's the enemy, right? What's the deal with the darkness and the light? What does the darkness do to the light? Can't do nothing to it. Did you notice that? The ESV is a little closer here. It says it has not overcome it. That's important for you to understand. The darkness can't even touch Jesus, okay? It can't get close to him. It can't mess with him. It can't do any of it. So could you help me out here a little, Tev? Yes, Dana? That's what he had too. Yeah, that's what he had too. Yeah, so there's an understanding here that darkness can't even get close, can't touch, can't understand, cannot mess with Jesus at all. Do y'all follow with me here? This is an important principle for you to get down into your hearts. In other words, Satan, if you have Christ in you, which is the hope of glory, okay, which is what the Holy Spirit does, then that means what? Well, Satan still has power over you. No, that can't be true. Do you see? If you have Christ in you, and the darkness can't touch it, can't overcome, and has never overcome, and can't get anywhere near Jesus, and Jesus, by the power of the Holy Spirit, dwells in you, then that means that Satan can't do nothing to you. Do you get it? He can't touch you. He can't get close to you. He can't mess with you. But what is our fear? That he can. Right? That's our fear. Our fear is that he can't. Whenever I hear from people who have had what I would categorize as like experiences with the darkness, okay? I've had friends who have told me stories about, and these are friends that I respect, and I think they're telling me the truth. I don't think they're cracked out. I don't think they're lying to me. Some of these are old pastors who have retired. You know, they all have similar stories. They have stories of they'll wake up in the middle of the night. You've probably heard stories like this before, and there will be this presence in the corner of the room. You know what I'm talking about? Like this dark presence that's there, and they don't know what to do with it. They can't do anything with it. But the interesting part is that that's about as far as it goes. In a few other stories, other things happen and they result, you know, and there's kind of this fear and this panic that happens as a result of it. But it's a terror play. In other words, it's a horror play. It's trying to move on God's people in a certain way. Satan can't touch you. That's the good news. Here's the other side of the good news. What has to happen in order for Satan to have access to you? What's that? God has to give him permission. That's exactly right. And where do we see that in the Bible? Job, right? Job, God specifically gives Satan permission to go mess with Job. Even with Jesus. Do you remember what Jesus was saying? He's talking to Peter, and what did Jesus say to Peter? Do you remember? Satan has been asking for permission to do what? To sift you. In other words, Satan can't access God's people unless God says, yes, that's okay. And that means that even if that happens, what's the good news? It's a trial. It's an intentional trial, and what do trials do to God's people? They make you stronger. They have a purpose behind them. Do you understand what I'm saying here? The only way that Satan can even remotely come close to God's people is if God allows it to happen, and he only allows it to happen when it's good for you. That's crazy. In other words, you need to get the right picture of Satan in your mind. Satan is a dog on a leash. You ever heard this expression before? Satan's a dog on a leash, and he can only go where the leash allows him to go, nowhere else. In other words, you don't need to be afraid. Buddy? To shake the weak away. It's a trial. Yeah, it brings all the problems to the surface. That's exactly right. So y'all kind of getting what I'm going after here? This is very important. Satan can't touch you apart from God's permission if you have Christ in you. Now, if you're not a Christian, none of this applies to you. Okay, do y'all follow with me here? If you're not a believer in Jesus, none of this applies to you. So I would not teach this lesson to the world out there, because they're most definitely, if they're not a follower of Jesus, they are under the influence of Satan to a large degree. Do y'all follow with me? So this is not for people out here. This is for Christians in here. Even 1 Corinthians 5, where it talks about the church turning someone over to Satan, what's the purpose of them being turned over to Satan? That their soul may be saved. You see that? That's 1 Corinthians 5. Write that down. Draw a circle around it. That's important stuff for you to remember. It's purposed. Colossians chapter 2, verse 10 says that you have been filled in him who is the head of all rule and authority. You are filled with the light. The darkness can't touch you. And if it does, it touches you in order to bring you through a good trial to grow you according to God's standard. So you don't have to be afraid. This is what I'm trying to drill into you right now. The play the enemy runs on God's people is to make them afraid. And what I'm telling you right now is that you don't have to be. You don't have to be afraid. You win. You've won. The light is full. The darkness can't touch you, can't get close to you. And if it does so for a good purpose, not a bad one. It does so that you may be stronger. In other words, the trial is good. The affliction is good. Its purposes come because God designed it. Satan doesn't beat Jesus ever, and Jesus in us. He's in us. So then what happens? What happens then? This is what typically goes down. We feel as though we are under some type of spiritual attack, okay? And then we respond, typically, with fear. What am I about to lose? How far is this going to go? We get flustered, and we get triggered into an emotional response. Not a response out of our brain, not a response out of the truth, an emotional response. What happens if I lose my, insert here, whatever it is. What happens if I lose my health? What happens if I lose my kid? How far is this going to go? And we start panicking and flush, and we're out of self-control. You get it? We no longer are guiding and ruling over ourselves. We're no longer filled with the truth. We're no longer governed by the truth. We are tossed to and fro. And there's actually entire books written on this concept, and they're not even necessarily written by Christian authors, okay? But this is a fascinating concept, is that when you are flustered, your decision-making capacity goes like that, okay? Did you know this? Have you noticed this? Do any of you have children? I don't know. So this is just how it plays out. If you get flustered, you respond emotionally, typically. The average human being does. And this is the play that the enemy makes. He sends fear. He tries to make us afraid so that we get flustered and then make poor decisions, make fight or flight decisions that he coaxes us into a trap through one mechanism or another. I'm thoroughly convinced. The Bible even says this in Jeremiah 17:9. The heart is what? Deceitful and desperately sick. In other words, don't trust your feelings. Your emotions are not made to be in charge. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 13. You should write this one down. I'm going to read it. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 13. Therefore, preparing your minds for action and being sober-minded, set your hope fully on the grace that will be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. Did you see all the self-control layered into that verse? There's three things that happened. Three things. First, prep your mind for action. He says, be intentional about how you're thinking about what's going on in your life. And then he says, be sober-minded. In other words, clear-headed, think right, and set your hope mentally, this is where we're going, fully on the grace that we brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. That's three huge things for Christians. In other words, he's saying, hey, be self-controlled, hey, be self-controlled, hey, be self-controlled. This is how you actually win these fights. The drive is not your feelings, in other words, okay? The drive is the truth. I'm going to say that again. The driver of your life is not your feelings. The driver of your life should be the truth. Prep your mind for action, be sober-minded, set your hope on the truth. You get what I'm saying here? Okay. Why is that so incredibly hard for us to do today? Say it again. A world of lies? Is that what you said? Yeah, just everywhere. I would agree with that. There's a lot of lies out there. But here's the point. We've been suckered by one big lie, which is that what does our culture think is true? Whatever you want it to be based on your feelings. You see how that plays out? This is the way that the world works. The world has been running this game on us for the last 50 years and gotten us to the point where we think our emotions are what's true, okay? And what I'm trying to tell you is this is why, not the only reason, but one of the biggest reasons we are so jacked up right now. Because we have allowed our feelings, the thing that shouldn't be in charge, to be in charge. And the enemy sees that as an opportunity to make a play on us. That's how it works. Well, I feel like, stop. We're not talking about your feelings. But isn't that's how so many of these conversations start? Well, I just feel like, nope, we're not talking about your feelings. We're talking about what's true. Tell me what's true. Tell me what's factual. Tell me what's evidence. But I feel like, nope, we're not talking about your feelings. Now, does that mean all emotions are evil? Are emotions evil? No, God gave you emotions. That's part of being a human being, is having feelings, having emotions. The problem is what? When they're in the driver's seat. Do you get it? God tells us to weep at appropriate times. God tells us to rejoice at appropriate times. But did you catch that? He said you should weep at appropriate times and you should rejoice at appropriate times, which means, are the emotions in the driver's seat? No. You're in the driver's seat. Truth is in the driver's seat. Y'all get this? All right. So the driver is not your feelings. The driver is Christ and his truth and your self-control. Okay? You believing what he's told you and being sober-minded, being self-controlled, setting your hope on truth. That's that big threefold moment there. All right, emotions are not bad, but they don't get to be in charge. Now, anybody in here military background? Anybody in here military? Okay, we got a handful of military background, guys. What did y'all? Wade, you did. Were you infantry? Yeah. Okay, I got it. And whenever you're infantry, how much do you shoot a gun? A bit. Yeah. You shoot more than your average American. And how often do you do drills? With guns or just to practice what it is that you're going to be doing? Every day. And it's a little thing. Like, I remember my brother has this story about whenever he was in the military. All my brothers and my father were Air Force guys, so pretty much just desk jobs. But anyway, that was a joke. It was an Air Force joke. I don't know if y'all know that or not. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, all my brothers and my dad. In fact, one of my brothers does quality control for some corporal's office now, and so he walks in and everybody automatically hates him. Anyway, so but he does some cool stuff. But whenever he first goes through basic training is terrible. They're like, let's see how well you function on no sleep and very little food for 8 weeks. Ready to go. That's basically how it plays out. And he puts them into basic training, and they've been just driving them like crazy all day long and working them stupid hard, and they're exhausted. And they finally get one day in their cycle where they're going to have a relatively loose day, which means I think they get like an hour to kind of relax. That's a loose day in basic training world. And so one of their drill sergeants walks in and he says, "Hey, which one of y'all shoots a gun really well?" And of course, all the guys are like, "I do. I shoot a gun really well." And the drill sergeant is like, "Got it. You're on bed alignment duty." And then basically meant that they had to make all the beds razor straight. And if they were even the slightest bit off, do y'all remember what the drill sergeants would do? For all you ex-military guys, do y'all remember what the drill sergeants would do if something was wrong with the bunkhouse? They would tear the whole bunkhouse apart. If it was wrong, like mattresses and all your stuff gets thrown everywhere, then he says, "When I come back, it better be perfect." Right? And then he would come back and something would be slightly off one of the beds, and what would the drill sergeant do? And you'd be in there until 2:30 in the morning doing bed alignment duty. Okay? Now, they would do these drills, one, to get inside these guys' heads, but also because perfection matters, okay? And they would drill and drill, both with this and with anything else. They would drill. I had a buddy of mine who was a sniper for one of the special reaction teams of the Army. I don't even think his unit exists anymore. But he said that they would send thousands of rounds down the field every week. Thousands of rounds. And we're talking like, big bullets, like expensive bullets. And just spending a ton of money. Why? Why were they doing that? Because when it mattered, they needed to make sure that they could shoot straight. In other words, whenever the adrenaline hits and your emotions are coming up and there's a real scene, you need to have practice putting that thing to your shoulder so many times that the end of the barrel doesn't shake anymore. Do you get what I'm saying? That's why they drill so much. You drill so much, not so much to... Not so much just in the sense of practice, but you're doing it over and over and over and over again so that it's almost just instinct, right? It's almost just instinct, the way that you operate. I think that something like that would be beneficial for God's people. 2 Timothy chapter 1, verses 6 through 7. Y'all want to flip there and just kind of follow with me here? Because this one's pretty important. 2 Timothy chapter 1, verses 6 through 7. This is not the same verse, but God has not given you a spirit of fear, but a spirit of what? Of power and love and self-control. That's right, very good. Power and love and self-control. okay? So if you're afraid, where's that coming from? There's some kind of sin or the enemy's messing with you, right? But God's given you one of power and love and self-control. Now look at 2 Timothy chapter 1, verses 6 through 7. For this reason, I remind you to fan into flame the gift of God, which is in you through the laying on of my hands. For God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power and love and self-control. Now we got some context for that verse there. But what does verse 6 tell us to do with it? He said, he's given you these gifts, but it's your responsibility to do what? Fan it into flame. Do you get it? So, in other words, here's the deal, Christians. If you feel like you don't have self-control, you have it, okay? If you're a Christian, if you believe in Jesus, if you believe that he has saved you, that he died for you, you have self-control. You have it, okay? But you have the responsibility to fan it into flame. Are y'all following with me here? In other words, you have the capacity on your side of the equation to do something, to bring this thing up, to practice it, to drill it, to fan it into flame, okay? You have, you have self-control, Christian. You have it, okay? Now, how do you fan it into flame? That's the next logical question. Okay, so we're responding in fear. We're not in control of our emotions. The devil's throwing us around. We feel like we're getting way pushed out here, guys. What do I do? I'm telling you that you already have the tools that you need in order to work through this well. You just need to learn how to fan it into flame. Okay, now that's what I want to talk about for the rest of the time that we have together for the next few minutes. I'm running out of time. So how do we practice this? How do we fan it into flame? A few things. First, you practice it with one another first. Now, what I'm saying is you practice it within degrees of intimacy. So the first degree of intimacy would be what? It would be your family, right? It'd be your family. You're arguing, you're thinking through things, you're talking through things with your family, you're running scenarios with your family. A parenting way to do this, like you got kids that are growing up, and you're going into, I don't know, you have to bring a 4-year-old through the china shop, right? Okay? And you say to the 4-year-old, are you going to touch everything in the building? No, Dad. Awesome. Now look at me. Are you going to touch everything in the building? No, Dad. Okay, great. I'm already proud of you. One more time. Are you going to touch everything in the building? No, Dad, I'm really not. Like that's a drill. Do you understand what I'm saying? That's running things through with your family before you put yourself into a situation that's questionable. A lot of times with our kids, we just throw them into a situation untrained, and then we're shocked whenever they don't handle it right. Why did that go sideways? We couldn't have seen that coming. Well, of course, because they weren't trained before they got in. Do you get what I'm getting at here? All right, so you're going to drop your kids off at a friend's house. And you know that typically whenever these kids get together, there's some rough housing that happens, right? And so you, with your kid, before you drop them off, you lay down the ground rules of the rough housing. Hey, you are allowed to punch them in the face. Or not. It depends on the kids and depends on the circumstances. But you lay down the rules with the kids. Okay, kids, when is it permissible to punch them in the face? When they hit you first. I don't know, whatever the scenario is that you're working through with your kids. You're their parents, you set these kind of ground rules with them. And then whenever they come back, be like, hey, Timmy, did you punch anybody in the face this time? Be like, no, Dad, I didn't. Yay, it was a great time. Do you see what I'm saying? You're setting a precedent with your children so that they can be drilled properly before that they go in. This applies to adults too. This applies to us too, okay? The enemy's coming after you. He's swinging his fear stick. What's your responsibility? First, I'm going to remember that promise from 1 Peter, okay? Or 2 Timothy, sorry. He's given me a spirit of power and love and self-control. So if I'm responding in fear and losing control of myself, I don't believe that that's true. That's what's true. I'm going to hold on and I'm going to fight well. Then I'm going to remember that promise from 1 Peter that says, I'm going to prepare my mind for action, I'm going to be sober-minded, and I'm going to set my hope fully on Jesus. This is the trajectory that I have right now. You see, if you're not drilling this, then why do you expect, if you're not trying to fan your self-control into a better place, in other words, why on earth would you expect to do better in the fight later whenever it comes at you again? Do y'all follow with me? Parents, you should be running things like this with your kids. What do you do if they say this to you? What about this? What if this comes up in conversation? Moms and dads should be running these kind of drills with each other. Brothers and sisters in the Lord should be running these drills with one another. Hey, what are you going to do if you lose your job? You got a plan? Hey, what are you going to do whenever they come after you and come after your reputation? How are you going to handle that? Are you thinking through these things well? Hey, what are you going to do? Do you see what I'm saying? We need to, as God's people, get used to drilling one another. Now, drills only work in degrees of intimacy, okay? So like within the context of a family, within the context of intimate Christian relationships like church members, you get what I'm saying? Like where you can feel safe and trust one another. Because if you're boxing with somebody, okay, even if you're just sparring, if somebody punches you in the nose, you might get a little mad at them. And then suddenly a sparring match becomes this huge right hook out of nowhere, right? You need to practice and drill with people that you're comfortable with, that you're safe with, that you think can help you grow in these areas. And then, after you've gotten really good at that, in other words, let me say it this way. In other words, we're not going to send our 5-year-old into debate creationism with the biology teacher from UL. Like, we're not going to do that. They're not ready for that. We're going to train them up as best we can and put them in areas where we think that they can succeed, and we're going to do the same thing for ours. We're going to practice and fan into flame our self-control. Now, this doesn't mean that we should just generally operate as people who think out loud perpetually, because this is tiring. You want to be somebody who's engaging and loving one another well and moving through those. But we do want to be practicing and drilling these things together. So with your kids is very important. With brothers and sisters of the Lord, that you have an intimate relationship is very important. Kick the ball around, poke at one another. That's going to be helpful. Second, I think it's also helpful when your feet are more underneath you in these areas to find ways to step out and engage in other areas of the public sphere. And this can be done at work. This can be done at family reunions. This can be done in all kinds of applications like that. You want to think of it like we were talking about before, a little bit like sparring. Now, I'll say this. Public sparring for the purpose of fanning into flame the gifts of self-control, for the purpose of practice, public sparring should probably be relegated to men. Okay? Public sparring should probably be relegated to men. And when I say public, I mean like openly public. Like there's a large public discussion, or there's I don't know, some kind of social media situation happening, or something that's very public facing. Okay? Or a boxing match. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's been relegated to men too. But all right, moving on. Now that's just because women, as a general disposition, women aren't made to swing first. You know what I'm saying? Women have been put together to be nurturers. That doesn't mean women shouldn't be scrappy, because if the husband gets shot, she needs to take care of herself and her kids. So she could still be scrappy. But I'm talking about public facing, swinging first, all those different things. Let your husbands go out and do that kind of work. But a conversation at a family reunion, a conversation at a dinner, a conversation like among lady friends to help fan those gifts into flame, to help fan the spirit of self-control. Invite scrutiny in your life a little bit. Invite your Christian friends to hurt your feelings a little bit so that you can practice. Do you get what I'm saying? This is a big deal. You welcome those kinds of things so that you can keep your head about you whenever it's time to go in. This is a lot. I find this is typically a lot easier for men just in general, because I think men just mess with each other anyway, right? You know, isn't that just generally kind of a way that men operate? Yeah, some of y'all are like, yeah, I'm married to a man like that, so I know about it. But it's true. Men pick on each other, and it's helpful. And so that's a good thing to go. So this is also why we teach our children how to argue, right? Because your kids are growing up in a world that's far more contentious than yours was. Far, far more. Like our world that we came up in was, country, everybody's nice, everybody likes each other. The world that your children are coming up in is basically, we were like Cold War-ish when we were growing up. Our kids are growing up in like, it's actually trench chemical warfare. They need to learn how to argue, which means that when they're arguing, they need to not let their emotions take control of them. They need to be able to go through and argue well, reason well, without losing control of themselves. Do y'all follow with me here? Okay, so big understandings today. One, the enemy is going to come at you by making you afraid. Okay? The truth is that the enemy can't touch you because Jesus is in you. The only reason he could get access to you is because God has allowed it to happen. And that means it's for your good. Amen. The way that we resist is we exert self-control and not respond to our emotions. But it's our responsibility to fan into flame our gifts of self-control. Are y'all following with me here? It's our responsibility to train those gifts. You've been given them, you need to train them. And there's a bunch of different ways to train them. And you need to train them in your children. Don't just put your kids in an environment and give them zero instruction and then be shocked whenever things are chaos at the end of it. That's not how it works. And don't just throw yourself into an environment that you have no training, no ability for whatsoever, and be shocked when it doesn't go well. That's going to happen too. A lot of this is stuff that it's your responsibility to train. Okay, we have a few minutes. Does anybody have questions? Wow. Okay, great. Then let's pray.